A Tall and Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 18, Unspoken Confession. Ashlynn hadn't had the apartment to herself in what felt like forever. She hated the feeling. She finished a long day of work and came home to a quiet, empty apartment. Ray was obviously not on the counter because all of his projects were put away nice and neat. The music wasn't playing, so Dorian was somewhere else. Most likely he was at practice. And who knew where Soren? Ashlynn lay back on her bed to stare at the ceiling. What was he doing? She closed her eyes and tried to picture him, which was easy to do. She had been doing it a lot lately. She imagined he would be cleaning up some mess Mayzie or Ray made in the kitchen. His sleeves would be rolled up on only one arm, not because he liked it that way, but because he always scraped his sleeves down accidentally on his right-hand side. His hair needed a trim, so it was probably hanging in his eyes slightly. She never tried to touch it before, but she imagined it was soft and fluffy by the way it fell when he tousled his hair, usually when he scratched his scalp. Would he be humming Mayzie to sleep? Would he be awake for long? Ashlynn sighed heavily. Why did she let her thoughts wander like this? It had been so long since that first time she saw him on the floor of her kitchen. She didn't know him, or even what he was. Not that it mattered. One look, and she knew he wasn't just a pest, or something that lived in the walls. He was someone. Absent-mindedly, she reached up and touched the marks on her wrists, thumbing over the few lines that had long healed. She remembered the drive home from the courthouse. She could vividly recall every emotion raging war in her heart. It was a tough day, and finding a sick and broken person on the floor was the last thing she wanted to deal with. But she was so glad she did. Everything would have played out so differently if... Ashlynn smiled to herself. Every memory of Soren played in fast forward in the blink of an eye. It made her heart flutter and nerves shiver. A million thoughts dared her to follow, but she stopped short. Heaviness settled over her heart. If only things were different. Ashlynn would have stayed there, but her protesting insides demanded dinner. Regretfully, she pulled away from the fantasy in her mind and slipped into a comfortable shirt and short shorts, letting her hair tumble down her shoulders while she walked into the kitchen. She began rummaging through her pantry and freezer. It was a sad state of affairs. A grocery trip was inevitable at this point. She took out some tilapia and rinsed some spinach to steam. It wasn't until she rinsed her rice and pushed the button with a satisfying click that she felt a familiar feeling of being watched. Ashlynn's eyes flicked over to see Soren stepping out of the electrical socket on the other side of the kitchen counter, Mayzie strapped happily to his back. Heart leaping into her throat, Ashlynn couldn't spit out the words faster than Soren. "Hey, Ashlynn," he said with a thoughtful smile. "Hey." Ashlynn had to physically shake her head to snap herself out of a trance. "Sorry, I didn't think I'd have visitors tonight." Soren, now looking slightly embarrassed, took a half step back. Oh, sorry. We can leave you. I just thought we'd pop down for a visit if you weren't busy. Plus, Mayzie was asking about you and something about Yorn. I thought you could help. Sorry, we'll be off. Have a good night." Soren turned and started to leave. "No. Please, no, don't go." "Eeyore," Ashlynn sputtered out. This stopped Soren in his tracks. He turned slowly, curiosity quizzically knitting his brow. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, a disbelieving and a half-quirky smile tugging at his lips. "Yorn," cooed Mayzie. Ashlynn chuckled at the toddler's excited hand-waving. It's a kid's show," Ashlynn explained. We watched it last time I watched Mayzie. One of the characters' names is Eeyore. Mayzie asked what kind of animal he was. She was calling them all bunny. At this explanation, Soren chuckled and bounced Mayzie in her backpack. That explains what Don-he is. Donkey. Great job, baby girl, grinned Soren. Redirecting his attention to Ashlynn, he smiled thoughtfully at her. Thanks, Ashlynn. Their eyes connected and lingered. Soren felt his chest tighten. Was it warm? Was his heart racing? Soren broke first, clearing his throat. Well, I guess we'll leave you be. Wait! Ashlynn called softly. Soren stayed planted in his place. Stay. Seriously, I was just thinking how I could use some company. Have you all had dinner yet? The smile on Soren's face made Ashlynn's heart melt. Well, I have no objections. What do you think, baby girl? Ashlynn, cooed Mayzie, which Ashlynn barely heard, but was instantly over the moon that she could hear the toddling borrower. Well, then I guess I'll get some extra utensils out. You've got to be pulling my leg, said Ashlynn as she attempted to stifle her laughing so she didn't wake Mayzie, who was fast asleep on the bedside table. You thought dust bunnies were real and that they were monsters under the bed? Okay, it was when I was really young. Some kid left out this book with this rabbit with blood on its front, and I was instantly convinced that this thing was a dust bunny. Bunnicula? I'm dead. I can't, giggled Ashlynn, leaning onto her back onto the bed. The three of them retreated to Ashlynn's room to watch a movie after dinner. She and Soren were on the bed while Mayzie was asleep in a bundle of soft blanket strips Ashlynn had. Ashlynn hadn't stopped smiling the whole evening. After being the only one to get Mayzie to try fish and getting a chance to hang out with Soren, Ashlynn decided there was no place she'd rather be. It wasn't terribly late, but Soren decided that they could stay downstairs for a little while longer since Ray was helping with some kind of project with Hero, and Dorian was at practice. It was only 7:30 after all. Mayzie, however, was already drooping and fast asleep. So, while Mayzie slept, she and Soren sat up and talked quietly. Well, talking had turned to laughing, with Ashlynn giggling at Soren's story. With Ashlynn leaning back and laughing, Soren folded his arms and looked away, rolling his eyes. Okay, smart tart, laugh it up, but keep in mind that you wouldn't be giggling if you were a borrower. The list of dangers is endless, and I'm just saying that Dust Bunny used to be one of them, said Soren defensively. Ashlynn could tell he was joking, but there was still a hint of truth in what he was saying. Ashlynn guiltily sat back up, so she was lying on her side again. Oh, Soren. Ashlynn reached out nearby and gently bumped Soren's shoulder with her index finger. Don't be like that, I'm sorry. Soren playfully shoved it away, but still shot one last teasing, indignant look to milk the guilt out of his human companion. Fine, I don't want to spoil the night, sighed Soren. But, come on, you can't say that you haven't misunderstood what something was based on its name. Not that I can remember, grinned Ashlynn sheepishly. Soren groaned and flopped backward onto the pale blue bedspread. Wow, that's fantastic, he grumbled. Perfect understanding. Guess that's what happens when you hear words through layers of wall. Okay, now that's totally fair. You have to hear through plaster, drywall, wooden beams. I get where the confusion would come in, sighed Ashlynn. As for the perfect thing, that is something I definitely am not. Definitely reminded of that recently. How do you mean? Asked Soren. Ashlynn immediately wished she could take back that last bit. She was talking about her conversation with Dorian. Had the musical team not told Soren about their talk? Ashlynn, everything okay? The concern in his voice for her was both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. Yeah, sorry. I was just talking about a conversation I had with Dorian recently, she said softly. Hearing this, Soren stiffened slightly and shook his head, rubbing his face with his hands. Yeah, I'm sorry he's been acting out lately. I'll have a talk with him, sighed Soren. Ashlynn's eyes widened, but felt a brief moment of relief. So, Dorian didn't say anything to Soren. No, it was a good talk, said Ashlynn. Soren pulled his hands away from his face and glanced up inquisitively at her. Really? Soren asked, almost disbelievingly. Yeah, really. We talked and got everything straightened out, reassured Ashlynn. She watched a visible tension vaporize around Soren, like how a strong gust of wind clears a cloud of fog. He pushed himself up with a smile on his face worth a perfect sunset. Ashlynn wanted it to last, but that terrible, horrible part of herself couldn't leave any questions in the back of her mind. Her curiosity, for better or for worse, always got the better of her. Hey, Soren? Started Ashlynn, suddenly very aware of her heart racing. I did want to ask something, if that's okay. Yeah, sure, anything, smiled Soren, who was still feeling tremendously better. It wasn't until he saw the look in her eye that made him almost regret saying anything. It was her biting her lower lip that made Soren suddenly feel nervous about answering his human companion's question. Those eyes, stormy blue-gray, locked his own hazel eyes into place. Was it warm in here? He was suddenly struck by the thought that he missed those eyes on him. Why didn't you tell me? The question itself threw him off guard. Tell her? Tell her what? It took him a second to realize she was talking about Dorian. Honestly, he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure how to even approach the subject of some of the things that happened, especially when it was a sensitive topic for Dorian. He decided to be completely honest, as if he could be anything else with her. I didn't really know how to tell you, said Soren. Ashlynn's brow furrowed. It didn't feel like my thing to tell. It's also not something that comes up easily in conversation. I mean, when can I say, wow, great story about your weekend? You know what happened a few weekends ago? Crazy story that creep Austin found and caught one of Dorian's friends, almost snatching him too. Thank goodness we managed to get him out after an insane escape, barely. Ashlynn's jaw slackened. She looked mortified and, to Soren, she also looked a touch guilty. Soren, I'm so sorry, said Ashlynn quietly. Soren merely sighed. No, I'm sorry. I hope you don't think that was a jab or me going after you. I should have told you about Dorian and what happened. And just so you know, you shouldn't blame yourself. Ashlynn felt her body shudder involuntarily. Don't deny it, Soren said before Ashlynn could open her mouth. I know that guilty look of yours. If anyone, it's me who should feel guilty. Huh? Ashlynn knew what she heard at the end of that, and Soren knew it too. He shifted on the blanket and looked away for a few moments. Soren, what do you feel guilty for? Soren puffed out a sigh and ran his fingers through his hair. Wow, I'm just getting it all out there. It's just if... Why was this so hard to say? He'd thought it for years. If we left with you, it wouldn't have happened. I made the wrong call. We should have stayed together. Ashlynn listened to Soren's words, feeling like she was in a free fall. She wanted the same thing, and her heart felt lighter than a feather just hearing she wasn't the only one who wanted it. She reached out and brushed his leg gently with her finger like she did so many years ago to comfort him. And, just like before, he reached out a hand and laid it against her finger. Soren, you wanted your brothers to learn to be independent. You were the only one they could really look up to. You made the best choice for your family, and there's no sense in punishing yourself for something you didn't know at the time. Believe me, I know the feeling, smiled Ashlynn, voice soft and soothing. And you know what else? What's that? Asked Soren. It was right there. It was right at the tip of her tongue. Just say it. I missed you more than I should have. I thought about you every day. I wish I never left, because I haven't felt complete since the day I left. I don't know how, I don't know when, I just love you. I silently have fallen for you. Her heart was pounding. Was now the chance to say it? Every nerve in her body felt charged. None of those words came out. Instead, she smiled and nodded, saying the best thing that was true. I'm glad we're together again. If you didn't make the decisions you did, and if I didn't make the choices I did, we might not be together here again. There it was again. That smile of his, the one that charmed her heart in the first place. Was this the first time she admitted she loved him? At least to herself? I'm glad too, replied Soren. Ashlynn surrendered. Even if now was the right time, the courage to speak up had vanished, snuffed like a candle, while her feelings lingered like smoke in the air. She would have to accept it. She would never get the chance to say what she knew. Still, couldn't she make the most of it now? Do you want to watch another movie? One that's more age-appropriate? At least until Dorian or Ray get back? Soren nodded and smiled. I'd like that. But I don't know what you're talking about. That movie you put on for Mayzie was very sweet. I liked it. And so did she, Soren replied. Ashlynn giggled and bumped his leg gingerly with her finger. I know it was, but this would be for adults. Cute for adults, explained Ashlynn. Well, how can I say no? Said Soren. Ashlynn leaned over and pulled up one of her favorites, The Holiday. Just as the intro music began, both of them glanced over at the same time to see Mayzie stretch and shove her thumb into her mouth. Her wavy brown hair, kissed with the slightest of auburn, frizzed out around her face. She's so sweet, sighed Ashlynn. I know, agreed Soren. I think she loves you. Ashlynn felt a shiver shoot up her spine. Was that a hint? A clue? Or just some kind of portrayal of affection for a toddler? Ashlynn decided to go along with it. Well, I love her too. She's amazing. With that, she hit play and let the movie roll. She laid on her side while Soren laid against the blanket which was against Ashlynn's arm. About an hour in, Ashlynn glanced down and saw Soren was completely asleep, leaned up against her blanket-covered arm. Ashlynn felt a smile pull onto the side of her cheek. His head was lolled off to the side ever so slightly. He was definitely going to get a crick in his neck like that. With the utmost care, she slipped her arm out from under him and lowered the blanket so that he was flat on his back. The slight movement made him stir, but not wake. Did she dare? Yes. Carefully, she reached out and gently stroked the top of his head. His hair was soft and fluffy. The movie finished, and Soren woke up. He He gathered up Mayzie and went back into the walls without waking the sleeping toddler. They said their goodbyes, and, once again, Ashlynn was alone in her apartment with her thoughts and dreams of what could have been.